The corridor stretched for half a kilometer, walls of pale gray alloy polished to a mirror sheen. Helena Vance walked its length without hurry, her footsteps the only sound in a space designed to swallow noise. The Dreschen Imperial Court believed in grandeur that humbled, architecture that reminded visitors of their insignificance. Every pillar, every vaulted arch seemed to whisper that she was a speck of dust entering a machine built for gods. She had worn a simple charcoal tunic, no adornment, no ceremonial braid. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing a face that had grown lean during the 3 years she had spent negotiating, delaying, and preparing. Behind her eyes lay the weight of a billion hopes, and the knowledge that if she failed, those hopes would end in fire. At the corridor's end, massive doors irised open without a sound. The throne room beyond was a semicircle of tiered galleries, packed with Dreschen nobles in their formal ridges of office. Their multifaceted eyes reflected the cold white light that radiated from floating globes overhead. At the center, elevated on a dais of dark metal, sat Emperor Terex. His elongated form was draped in a robe of shifting copper threads, his bony crest swept back like a crown grown from his skull. Helena stopped at the designated mark on the floor. She did not bow. Ambassador of the Human Concordance, a herald intoned, his voice amplified by discreet speakers. You are granted audience. Emperor Terex tilted his head. The Empire has entertained your kind's requests for decades. We have been patient, but our patience requires nourishment, and you have offered none. Why should we not simply absorb your worlds and be done with these tiresome talks? A susurration of amusement rippled through the galleries. Helena waited for it to fade. Then she lifted a small crystalline data slate, a smooth obsidian-like slab, no obsidian band, so just a slate of dark composite. She activated its projector. You misunderstand, Emperor, she said, her voice steady. I'm not here to request. I'm here to deliver humanity's final choice. Withdraw every Dreschen military asset from the Sol system, from Proxima Centauri, from Ross 128 and all human colonies. Remove your orbital platforms, your picket ships, your intelligence drones. Declare humanity an independent sovereign power. Do this within 72 standard hours or face the consequences. The gallery's amusement died. Terex's crest flattened, a sign of irritation. You threaten us. Your species barely achieved faster-than-light travel 4 generations ago. You have no fleet that can challenge a single provincial garrison. What possible consequences could you offer? Helena let the slate project a holographic star map. 14 systems glimmered red, the core logistical hubs of the Dreschen Empire. Inside each of these systems, we have placed a phase destabilizer, a device that, when activated, will create a recursive collapse of local subspace geometry. Your FTL lanes will become unnavigable. Your communications will fail. Your empire will be cut into isolated fragments, and every world will have to survive alone. This is not a bluff. Terex leaned forward, his breathing slits flaring. Lies. You lack the science, the resources. This is a desperate fiction. 72 hours, Helena repeated. Leave our worlds or learn how well your empire functions when its spine is severed. She turned and walked back through the doors before the Dreschen guards could react. Behind her, Terex's voice boomed. Mobilize the invasion fleet. We will burn Terra to bedrock. These primitives will learn the cost of empty threats. But even as the command was given, a junior sensor officer near the tactical gallery was staring at his readout in horror. Across the 14 highlighted systems, energy signatures were beginning to spike, faint, rhythmic pulses that matched the theoretical footprint of a phase cascade precursor exactly. The officer's hand trembled as he opened a priority channel to the throne. The ultimatum had just become something far more dangerous than a human's desperate words. Part 2, Echoes in the Void. Grand Admiral Sorvin had commanded the Third Grand Armada for 27 cycles. He had crushed rebellions in the Vekar Nebula, glassed the Alari moons until their atmosphere became a toxic soup, and never once felt doubt. Doubt was a flaw of weaker species. Yet as the Talon of Dominion tore out of its warp translation with a lurch that sent the crew tumbling, doubt crept into his mind like cold water seeping through a hull breach. Report, he demanded, pulling himself upright against the command cradle. The ship's interior lighting flickered, stabilized, flickered again. The main display showed the fleet's formation shattered. Ships that had been locked in perfect alignment were now scattered across 3 light seconds, some drifting, others tumbling with navigation thrusters firing at random. Transit disruption, Admiral, the science officer called, her voice tight with controlled fear. A subspace pulse originated from the Sol direction. It propagated through our warp corridor and forced an emergency collapse. We've lost 8 destroyers entirely. They didn't emerge. Sorvin's jaw ridges ground together. Source: unknown. But the pulse characteristics match the signature that the human ambassador's ultimatum described. It is a coherent, destabilizing waveform, if it repeats at higher intensity. A second shudder ran through the ship. The lights died for 2 full seconds. When they returned, every display screen on the bridge had been replaced by a single image. Ambassador Helena Vance, seated in a simple chair, a countdown timer ticking beside her. Grand Admiral Sorvin, she said, the transmission somehow overriding all encryption protocols. You are currently outside safe operational parameters. The pulse you just experienced was a calibration test. The next one will be full-scale. I strongly suggest you power down your reactors and await further instructions. You have the same choice as your Emperor. Leave our space or face what comes next. The message looped. Sorvin slammed a fist onto his console. Trace that transmission. Activate secondary weapons. Prepare torpedoes for a full spread. We will not be dictated to by a child species. But his engineering officer was already shaking his head. Admiral, the reactors are fluxing. If we engage the primary drive or attempt weapons ignition, we risk a runaway containment breach. The pulse has altered the fundamental constants inside our reactor cores. We have to scram them. Every instinct in Sorvin screamed to fight, but he had not risen to Grand Admiral by ignoring physics. Emergency shut down all ships, he ordered, the words tasting like ashes. And get me a channel to the Emperor. We have been outflanked by ghosts. One by one, the lights of the mighty Dreschen Armada winked out, leaving them floating in the vast silence between stars, waiting for a human decision that would determine if they ever saw home again. Part 3, CRACKS in the Empire. The High Council chamber on Dreschen Prime had become a pit of shouting nobles and frantic aides. Emperor Terex sat rigid upon his dais, absorbing reports like blows. The Grand Armadas scrambling. The loss of 6 provincial relay stations. The complete isolation of the Turl sector, where 12 billion citizens were now without FTL contact. You assured me this was impossible, Terex said to his supreme science advisor, an ancient Dreschen whose crest had gone pale with age. You said humans could not manipulate subspace with such precision. Explain this. The advisor's voice was a dry rustle. They cannot. The energy requirements alone, but the pulses we have recorded are real. The effect is cascading through our network. It is not a direct attack on ships. It is an attack on the fabric of FTL itself. If the next phase triggers, every hyperlane within 1,000 light-years of a destabilizer will become unusable, permanently. Then strike first, Terex snarled. We still have vessels that have not entered the affected zones. Launch every remaining ship from the home fleet. Overwhelm Earth before they can trigger the full cascade. The War Minister stepped forward. Emperor, if we do that, they may activate the devices instantly. We would lose the home fleet as well as the Armada. The Empire would be defenseless against the slave uprisings already beginning. The word slave hung in the air like a blade. For the first time, the Council fell quiet, not from discipline, but from the shared realization of vulnerability. In a human diplomatic bunker buried deep under a mountain on Luna, Helena Vance watched the countdown reach 0. Her staff stood behind her, a dozen people who had lived with this secret for years, their faces pale but determined. Initiate Phase 2, she said. Across 14 star systems, the dormant satellites that humanity had scattered over decades stirred. They did not explode. They simply amplified a specific subspace harmonic that had already been woven into the Empire's FTL infrastructure through decades of trade deals and technology transfers, technology that humans had helped maintain, subtly altering its resonance patterns. Now those patterns sang a song that unmade the very corridors they had created. One after another, the hyperlane beacons of the Dreschen Empire fell silent. Not violently, just silent. A great empire, carved from 1,000 conquered species, suddenly found itself cut into isolated islands. On the Talon of Dominion, the last emergency lights died. Sorvin was plunged into absolute darkness, his breath the only companion. Far away in the throne room, Emperor Terex stared at the blank tactical map and understood, too late, the shape of the choice he had been offered. Part 4. The silence that followed. The silence was worse than any explosion. For Grand Admiral Sorvin, drifting in the powerless husk of his flagship, it became a physical weight pressing against his senses. The Talon of Dominion had been a living creature of humming reactors, clicking relays, the constant murmur of 10,000 crew. Now it was a tomb. He floated in the command cradle, the emergency oxygen growing thin. Around him, bridge officers gasped in the dark, their crests brushing against bulkheads as they sought any working system. Nothing responded. Then a metallic clang echoed through the hull, a docking clamp engaging. Sorvin tried to brace himself, expecting boarders with weapons. Instead, emergency strips flickered to dim blue and the main hatch cycled open. 3 figures in clean, simple vac suits drifted through. Humans. Their helmets were transparent, faces visible. A woman and 2 men, carrying not rifles but toolkits and portable atmosphere scrubbers. The woman pulled herself to a stop in front of Sorvin and removed her helmet. Short dark hair, calm eyes. "Grand Admiral, I'm Commander Lin Quan, Engineering Corps. Your life support will fail in 11 minutes. My team can restore minimal function and bring the temperature up to survivable levels, but I need your unconditional surrender of this vessel and all personnel aboard." Sorvin's pride flared. "I do not surrender to primitives who fight with tricks." Quan's expression didn't change. "The trick has crippled your entire empire. Your crew is suffocating. Is your pride worth 8,000 lives?" The Admiral's executive officer, a younger Dreschen named Vorth, drifted closer. "Sir, the crew is family, please." Sorvin's crest drooped. The air had become so thin that his vision was tunneling. "I surrender the Talon of Dominion," he whispered. "Save my people." Quan nodded, and her team moved with quiet efficiency, patching in portable power cells and stabilizing the atmosphere systems. As oxygen flooded back, Sorvin found himself weeping, a biological response he had never experienced. Not from fear, but from a broken understanding of what superiority truly meant. Across the scattered remnants of the Armada, similar scenes played out. Human engineering shuttles, prepositioned and waiting, docked with drifting Dreschen warships and offered life in exchange for compliance. Not conquest, not slaughter, a systematic, almost gentle dismantling of imperial authority. From Luna, Helena Vance broadcast a galaxy-wide message on every frequency the Dreschens could still receive. "This is the result of your choice to stay. We now offer it again. Withdraw your forces from every human world. Release all prisoners. Demilitarize the buffer sectors. Accept these terms and the cascade will be halted. Refuse, and we will not stop at paralysis. The next phase will target your planetary power grids, your water systems, your food synthesizers. You will fall back into the Dark Age you inflicted on others." The Empire, shattered into 100 isolated fragments, had no unified response. But on Dreschen Prime, Emperor Terex finally understood that the choice was no longer his to make. He called for a peace delegation, his voice hollow. Part 5. Broken CROWNS. The human delegation met the Dreschen peace envoys not in a sterile diplomatic chamber, but in a restored temperate forest on the North American continent. Sunlight filtered through oak leaves, birdsong replaced the hum of machines, and a stream chuckled over smooth stones. Helena Vance had chosen the location deliberately, a statement of renewal, of what humanity was, and what it refused to lose. The lead Dreschen negotiator, a scarred veteran named Peter Kelver, stood awkwardly on the mossy ground, his polished boots sinking into soil. "This is irregular." "This is Earth," Helena replied, settling onto a simple wooden bench. "We nearly lost it to industrial collapse before we reached the stars. We will not lose it to you." What? Kelver's multifaceted eyes reflected the dappled light. "Your weapon has crippled our infrastructure. Billions are suffering. If you have the capacity to reverse the cascade, I implore you, do so. We are prepared to discuss terms." Helena handed him a single sheet of actual paper, a gesture of deliberate anachronism. "These are the terms: full withdrawal from all human territories, immediate release of every human prisoner, including those in forced labor colonies, dismantling of all military stations within a 20-light-year buffer, reparations paid in raw materials and technology access, and formal recognition of the human concordance as a sovereign, equal power." Kelver read the list, his crest twitching. "This will leave our border sectors defenseless. Rebellions will consume a dozen provinces." "You conquered those provinces," Helena said. "Maybe it's time they had their own choice." Kelver's aide whispered urgently, reminding him that the human ambassador had hinted at second-generation destabilizers, capable of cracking planetary cores. The bluff still held. Kelver's shoulders sagged. "The Empire accepts." The signing took place under that canopy of leaves. As the Dreschen delegation departed, Commander Lin Quan approached Helena. "You know, if they ever find out we never had a real planet cracker." Helena watched the alien shuttle lift off, a faint smile touching her lips. "They won't, and by the time they're in any position to question it, we'll have built one for real." The smile held a depth of cold, patient resolve that made even Quan shiver. Part 6. The Architect's Gambit. 3 years before the ultimatum, in a cramped university lab on Mars, Dr. Idris Nwasu had discovered a beautiful flaw. The Dreschen FTL communication network relied on quantum-entangled relay beacons that maintained coherence through a precise subspace frequency. If you introduced a counterphase harmonic, something the Empire's own engineers had never considered, because their civilization had relied on the same stable frequency for millennia, you could convince the network that a catastrophic cascade was occurring. The system would shut itself down as a protective measure. It was, Nwasu explained to a young diplomat named Helena Vance, like yelling fire in a crowded theater. The theater would empty, even if there was no fire. Humanity had no fleet, no superweapons, but it had centuries of experience in asymmetric warfare, in doing more with less, in turning an enemy's strength into a vulnerability. The plan had been audacious: deploy thousands of cheap microsatellites across the Empire's core systems using commercial shipping routes, wait decades for them to drift into position, and then, at the right moment, trigger a synchronized pulse that would paralyze the entire Dreschen hegemony. It was a bluff, a monumental, breathtaking bluff, and it had worked. Now, 5 months after the treaty, Helena Vance sat in her office overlooking the rebuilt Vancouver skyline, reading a priority-encrypted message. An Imperial defector, a mid-level logistics officer, had arrived on a border station with data. The message contained a single line: "They know it was hollow." Her blood chilled. Not all Dreschen had accepted the new order. A faction of hardliners, calling themselves the Remnant, had seized control of a hidden shipyard in the Turl Nebula. They had analyzed the pulses and realized the truth. There was no planet killer, no second-generation horror. The humans had bluffed, and now the Remnant was coming with a fleet they had kept secret, intending to strike Earth before the Concordance could rearm. Helena tapped her console. "Get me Nwasu and the War Council. It's time to show them that the only thing more dangerous than a bluff is making it real." Part 7. The Final Choice. The Remnant fleet dropped into lunar orbit without warning, 16 heavy cruisers and a carrier bristling with atmospheric bombers. Their commander, a fanatic named Admiral Drek, broadcast a single message to Earth: "You have no weapon. You are defenseless. Surrender unconditionally, or we will turn your cradle into ash." In the Concordance command bunker, Helena Vance stood before a holographic tactical display. The faces around her were tense, but she was calm. "Activate the Janus array," she said. Dr. Nwasu, now graying but sharp-eyed, entered a long sequence of commands. 3 years of peace had not been wasted. The same networks that had broadcast the false cascade had been upgraded, their emitters replaced with genuine phase destabilizer technology, no longer a trick, but a forge-hot blade. The remnant fleet's sensors shrieked as a point of gravitational anomaly bloomed 300,000 kilometers off their port flank. A captured asteroid, nickel iron and 20 kilometers across, shivered. Its surface cracked. Then, with a silent yawn of distorted spacetime, it crumpled inward, collapsing into a singularity the size of a marble before evaporating in a last burst of Hawking radiation. The entire sequence took 11 seconds. Helena's voice filled the remnant command channel. "Admiral Drek, you were offered a choice. Leave Earth or face the consequences. You assumed the consequences were a lie. They were merely delayed." Drek's flagship hung motionless, its weapons charged but unfired. The tactical data scrolling across his bridge showed gravitational lensing consistent with a genuine phase collapse, something no trick could produce. "You are bluffing again," Drek whispered, but his voice cracked. "You must be." "We told you the truth all along," Helena replied. "You simply refused to believe it until it was too late. Now I offer the choice one final time. Power down your weapons and retreat beyond the buffer zone, or we will replicate that demonstration on every ship you command. This is not negotiation. This is your last chance to survive." The silence stretched. Drek's crest flattened entirely. He was no Grand Admiral Sorvin, no warrior of misguided honor. He was a fanatic staring into the face of a fact that swallowed all faith. "All ships," he ordered, his voice barely audible, "withdraw." The remnant fleet turned and fled into the void, leaving only the shimmering afterimage of a dead asteroid and the unshakable knowledge that humanity's final choice had been, from the very beginning, utterly sincere.